Hello, you're listening to the 100th episode of Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm going to be talking about how to write a TV pilot, specifically a TV comedy pilot, since that, for me, is my passion and what I'm pursuing in my career. And all of this information, it's stuff that I myself have learned over the years. I'm still learning new things. And, the more you write, the more you get better, the more you get feedback, you learn, you figure out what your strengths are as a writer, what you can improve as a writer. There's always room for improvement. So constructive criticism is a great thing. So first and foremost, what is a pilot? Not those people who fly airplanes, but a TV pilot is the first episode of a show, but specifically, that's sometimes not even the case. What really is what it is an episode that you make to sell a series, so it becomes a series. So sometimes the pilot becomes the first episode of the series, sometimes it's not. In animation, typically, things change from the pilot to then the first episode of the show. That can be character design, voice actors, etc. And similarly with network shows, even say there could be different actors, things like that can change from the pilot to then when the series is actually picked up. So the point of a pilot is to make it into a show. And there are really two main things a pilot should do. It needs to be a full, complete story in and of itself, and it needs to show how it can have legs. Meaning that these characters, this world, this is something that viewers are going to be wanting to tune into every week, or if it's on Netflix, just to binge then. So, Netflix, Hulu, etc., any of those streaming platforms. So it is really interesting how the TV landscape has changed so vastly, even in most recent years. Because back in the day, there were just the three TV networks, which were CBS, NBC, and ABC. And then later on, Fox came along. And nowadays, obviously everything's blown out of the water now. Now, besides the network TV, there's cable TV, and more dominant than ever are the streaming services. And so there really are so many different platforms for television, and people are watching TV differently. It's not necessarily appointment viewing where you have to just sit down 8 o'clock, whatever, and just watch it that night. If you miss it, then that's it. That's how it was back then. But now, now people can record episodes, or if you're watching it on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, etc., you just watch it at your own leisure. So, everything with that is changing, but what people always care about are interesting stories and great characters that you want to follow on their journey, that we want to see them grow, we want to see them in their highs, their lows. We want visual, engaging storytelling that grips us as an audience, and things we don't always expect, since there's certain TV still that is considered comfort food, namely sitcoms. But then there is TV that obviously it's strayed so far from that, not just episodic, one and done episodes that just everything's wrapped up nicely in 30 minutes, so that episodic. Now it's more so where it is linear storytelling, telling a complete story over an arc of a season. So I find it all interesting as someone who has been pursuing this industry and just reading about the industry and how things are changing. There's a great article that I recently read from Mike Schur, who is an amazing TV writer. He's worked on The Office. He actually plays Mose on The Office. And he also created so many shows. He created The Good Place. He created Parks and Recreation. He co-created that. He also co-created Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And he's actually married to J.J. Philbin. Rest in peace, Regis Philbin. But she is also an excellent TV writer. She's worked on many shows, one of my favorites being New Girl. So that's really cool. So anyway, the whole point that I'm getting at is Mike Schur recently, there's a great article that he talked about how TV is changing in that now it's less about creating really long-term shows and more so about establishing just kind of these, which more the norm, shorter shows, and that if it doesn't grip an audience after a couple seasons or two, the network then say, or the studio, whatever, the show will be canceled, and then that'll just be it. They'll try to just start another show that's similar to that. And he says that can kind of hurt a show, because then we don't get this like nice payoff where it's, say, like episode 110, and now we've been with these characters for several years and we get to see them in different ways. So it's a little different now, whereas other shows that have gone on for so long, like one of the biggest shows of our generation is The Office. Such a huge show, ran for 9 seasons, over 200 episodes on NBC, and of course it's based on the original British version of it, created by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, which was the original Office, the UK version. And that one only ran for 2 seasons and not even 20 episodes, like a dozen episodes or so. And it's really tight-knit, the storytelling of that one. If you haven't seen the original Office, I highly recommend it. It is available currently on Hulu. And I love The Office, the American version. That's one of my all-time favorite shows. But what he was saying in that interview was that you don't get, like he said specifically, that, oh, Jim kisses Pam in episode 28, whatever it was, which is specifically, it's the season 2 finale of The Office, Casino Night. So, and then he said if the show had ended there, then it's like you wouldn't have had any room to see them with their relationship. Then when they later on get engaged, they get married, they have kids. And it's just not like he's saying that with those kinds of shows, then you don't really get that nice payoff later on with all those emotional peaks and valleys of the characters. That's just interesting, too, to think about. So then, of course, I know there are mini-series, things like that. So it's really, though, just a matter of what kind of stories you want to tell. Like with animation, it's different. It can go on much, much longer, and the characters obviously don't age. Looking at, namely, adult animation, where these shows have no signs of ever ending. I'm talking The Simpsons, I'm talking Family Guy, even though that show was canceled literally twice over the span of its run, and now it's just no end in sight with that. Also, Bob's Burgers is another great show, which they are actually working on a movie for it as well. South Park has been on since 97, still going strong. Matt and Trey have said they have no plans of ending it until Comedy Central cancels it. And then there are certain other shows. If you look at, of course, BoJack Horseman, another one of my all-time favorite shows, where that show, obviously it being on Netflix, them wanting you binge it, and I love that show, my God. But where each season tells a complete story, so it's not one of those shows where you could just like jump in at any random episode. To really appreciate it with the narrative and everything, starting from the beginning and watch the entire run of 77 episodes. So with animation, adult animation in particular, but also with kids animation, of course, looking at SpongeBob SquarePants, no end in sight for that show, that those shows can really go on much longer because you just have the voice actors and the characters don't change appearance-wise. They don't get older or anything. So whereas with a sitcom, if you look at just like the classic sitcoms of the 90s and how, family sitcoms, and the kids grow up over the years, and also in our generation of, say, Modern Family, which ran for a long time as well, with 11 seasons, 250 episodes. That eventually, though, you run the risk of, with those types of shows, of things kind of getting stale and then jumping the shark, that classic phrase, which goes back to, it originated from Happy Days when the Fonz, played by Henry Winkler, tried to jump a shark. So that's where it came from. And it basically just means that they just go for shock value for the sake of novelty. It's basically like you're just running out of ideas. So it's like, let's just go for this obscene, over-the-top thing, just for the sake of trying to keep it fresh in a different way. So it's basically whatever is your cup of tea. And obviously, like I said, I'm focusing on comedies. I know with drama, it's different too. Like more so, that's just telling a complete story for the most part. Or if there's like procedurals, that's much different too, where it's the same thing every episode with just different characters, like also anthology series, etc. Obviously, there's so much type of TV out there. But specifically, I'm focusing on like sitcoms and just comedies in general and a bit of animation, since those are the things that I generally prefer. So, to write a pilot, I've written several pilots, and it is extremely difficult. And the thing you have to remember when you write anything is that it's not going to be perfect the first time around. And it's to go through many revisions, many different versions of it until you eventually get to that awesome thing that's like ready to be sold. So first and foremost is coming up with an idea. And one of my teachers said recently that stuck with me. He said that ideas are worthless. It's the execution is what matters. And that's absolutely 100% true. That anyone could have a great idea, but if you don't make it something that can be compelling to watch, then people aren't going to care. So coming up with ideas, more so, I think obviously ideas can come from anywhere. Maybe it's something that you witnessed, something you experienced, something that has always stuck with you, or something that you truly believe in that you haven't seen before. So there are obviously many similar sitcoms out there, but again, it's a matter of how do you put your own unique spin on it. So also something I learned about recently is that it's like there's these different types of scripts, and one of them is like blank with a twist. So it's like taking something, tweaking one element of it, and then it becomes a new thing. And that works a lot in movies in particular too. But with pilots, it's really just a matter of like you're going to want to stay with these characters for a long time, for years, hopefully, like ideally, say at least 5 years or so. But again, obviously it varies. It depends on taste, depends on hopefully if the series has legs, like are things going to change each season, or are we going to see them in different phases in their life, or, what kind of story you're wanting to tell. So look at, for instance, one of my favorite pilots, New Girl, the New Girl pilot. And I mentioned this when I discussed the show. I actually had read the pilot before I watched the pilot, and there were differences between the script to what actually ended up on TV. And that idea came from the creator, Liz Meriwether, having been cheated on, and then taking the idea of her, one of her male friends telling her at the time, oh, I would still do you. And then that's at the end of the episode with Schmidt saying that to Jess, played by Zooey Deschanel. So it's one of those things where that personal experience, and then it's such a quirky, lovable show. They always called it, in the marketing of the show, adorkable. But what's amazing about that show, that pilot, is that the characters are established so well right off the bat, even though Coach then leaves after the pilot, but then he comes back later on. If you listen to me talk about New Girl, or if you're a fan of the show, you already know. We already know who Jess is, we already know who Schmidt is, we already know who Nick is, their personalities, and more importantly, the relationships. How already we see the, budding romance, very subtle, but it's already there between Nick and Jess, and how that's going to play out. And also, of course, Cece and Schmidt. So, with the pilot, the whole thing is, again, so many things you have to do. Despite establishing the world, first and foremost, and the characters and their relationships with each other. Hints of, are these two friends? Are these two going to be, enemies throughout the show? So look at, for instance, also another one of my all-time favorite shows, as I've already said, BoJack Horseman. Even though the pilot is, one of the, not that great compared to the rest of the series, but in terms of establishing the show, how, first off, the whole universe of the show are these anthropomorphic animals and humans coexisting. So, all the animals, and then just, humans, and then it's just normal in the world of the show. And the bits of humor, the, wordplay and everything, how it's all established in that first episode. And more importantly, though, above all of that, the theme of the show about finding happiness. Can you find happiness? Can you change? All these existential things are established and explored throughout the show, just in the first season alone, and then within each subsequent season. And how it builds up to the conversation between BoJack and Diane, and them talking about happiness, and how when she tells him we're all responsible for our own happiness, and that it's not too late, establishing all this stuff that the show explores more in depth, particularly establishing that core relationship of the show and how this is what the show is going to explore. So also finding the voice of the show. Another, there's so many great animated pilots as well for kids shows, because I'm just such a big fan of Nickelodeon, as I'm sure you know by now. For instance, Rugrats, one of my favorite shows, Rugrats, the pilot was Tommy and the Great White Thing. So Tommy being fascinated by the toilet, and then obviously it changed much more between that and then the first episode of the show, Tommy's first birthday, when then we have Chucky and Angelica, Phil and Lil. Or for instance also Hey Arnold, how that pilot then became 24 Hours to Live, and it was the whole thing with Arnold pretending to be crazy so then Harold wouldn't hit him, and it's just so funny how, like, the characters look so different. It's, like, really early on, so, like, the kids sound, like, really young. It's just so funny. Another great one is I love Invader Zim, but, like, the pilot for that one is not that great. Like, the first episode is amazing for the show, but the pilot, again, it's just a matter of, like, you're selling the show, and that changed a lot, too, from, like, even the humor in that one. It's a little more... like, it's nowhere near as dark as the actual show, and that show's amazing. But, again, the whole point, though, is establishing the voice of the show, and what is the potential? Like, where do we see, like, the beginnings of conflicts and where we can explore things? So despite already, like, having a contained story in and of itself in just the first script, like, look at, for instance, also a huge popular sitcom too, Friends, which ran for 10 seasons and 236 episodes, and ran from 94 to 2004. So with that one, we already meet the 6 friends, Rachel, Ross, Monica, Phoebe, Chandler, and Joey. And already what's going to be, like, the big romance of the show, really, with Ross and Rachel. And so already establishing Ross and Monica are brother and sister, and they live in New York City, and all of that. So then with some of these pilots, like, they're not, the point is that, like, they're not that great, but it's like they sold the show, like, they saw the potential in them. Like, another one that, like, had to, like, kind of find itself a little bit was Seinfeld. Elaine isn't in the pilot, but already it had the voice of the show. And originally, like, some of the critique for the show back then, because created by Larry David, of course, and Jerry Seinfeld, and this is another one of my all-time favorite shows. It's phenomenal. Ran for 9 seasons, 180 episodes. And one of the critiques was that an executive said it was too New York and too Jewish, because Larry is Jewish and he grew up in Brooklyn. So I see that as a compliment, because really that means, like, it's so distinct and not everyone is going to get it at first, because that's the voice of the show and that's from his perspective, namely Larry David being the showrunner. So that's what makes certain shows stand out, of having a unique voice. BoJack Horseman, too, for me, the first time I watched it, I was, like, already in love with the show. Just having a really unique voice, a unique perspective, something important to say, like a commentary on the human condition and all of these important existential themes about happiness, about the ability to change, about if you're a good person, all of these really interesting, deep, profound things. So that's why it's, like, with certain pilots, there's, like, exposition, of course, too, but it's like you have to establish those things and kind of find a way to work it into the dialogue or whatever, so that doesn't feel forced. Another huge show, obviously, again, not everyone's cup of tea, but I enjoyed it, was The Big Bang Theory. And in that pilot, it establishes the premise for the show, that they have a new neighbor, Penny, who moves in next door, and it's like they're the 2 nerds, Leonard and Sheldon, and she's, like, the outgoing girl who wants to be an actress, so it's like they have to learn from each other, these 2 worlds, really. And then what's interesting, too, though, is, like, once you establish the show, then after, say, a few episodes or so, eventually, at some points, it deviates from the premise once you've established it. Like, really, with New Girl, after the pilot, she wasn't the new girl anymore, because then even in the second episode, they got a new roommate, Winston. After Coach leaves the show, they had to get someone else, and Winston's amazing, obviously, one of the best. But that's something else to think about, too, that there's, like, 2 different types of pilots, which is, like, an episodic pilot, meaning that it could just be any episode of the show, really, or a premise pilot, which is establishing the premise of the series and really jump-starting the series. And a good example of a premise pilot is The Last Man on Earth. That's an amazing pilot. I talked about that show a couple years ago now, and it establishes that he's the only person on Earth, Will Forte, and just, like, how he's kind of slowly going insane, but then at the end of the episode he sees smoke, so he knows someone else is there, and then it turns out to be Kristen Schaal, and then for a while it's just him and Kristen Schaal, Carol, played by Kristen Schaal, and so then, yeah, you know the show, if you've seen it, then more people come along, so then already it's like he's not the last man on Earth anymore, because then there's more people. But that show actually originally was supposed to be a movie, so that's why then they made it into a show. So when you have your idea, though, I know I'm talking a lot about different examples, but I hope you're bearing with me. So before you even write anything at all, like, thinking about your characters and then, like, breaking them down. So it makes sense. Like, everyone does things differently with like your writing process. Maybe it helps you to just kind of plot things out first with an overview of the show. But for me, it usually helps to like break down the characters first. So establish the main character, or if it's an ensemble show, the main characters and what their relationships are from one another, distinct personality traits, maybe distinct things about their backstory, say like their relationships, oh, this is this person's ex, this is their best friend, and then also where the show is taking place. So it's like, like the who, what, where, when, why, how of it all. Why are we going to be in these characters' lives now as viewers? Why are we going to be following them now? And like what's going on in their lives now. Like maybe something happened. In the case with New Girl, it's because she just got dumped and now she has to find new roommates. Then she moves in with Nick, Schmidt, and Coach, later Winston. In that case, that being a premise pilot. Or like with Friends, Rachel running out on her wedding, so then she moves in with Monica. Or with The Big Bang Theory, Penny moving in, so now they have a new roommate and Leonard already is smitten with her. Not a new roommate, sorry, a new neighbor, and Leonard is already smitten with her. Or in Schitt's Creek, where the Rose family loses all their money, they have to move to the town of Schitt's Creek, and then they live in a motel, and that's the premise of the show that we see in the pilot. Those are just a few examples. But then on the other side of it, if you look at, say, South Park, well, that's just an episodic pilot, because it's not really establishing anything. It's not like anyone moved in to South Park that first episode. They're already there. Cartman gets an anal probe. Oh my gosh. But that one already establishing, well, these kids like to curse a lot, and look how crude the animation is, and it's like over the top, it's hilarious, it's got satire to it. So again, with that show, well, really, again, that's the first episode. I really like you consider the pilot is the Santa versus Frosty, and like the Jesus versus Frosty, those two Christmas cards they had made. But again, that's just already like the characters already lived there, they're already best friends and all of that. So it depends on when you like where you want to start the story. When's the most interesting point, the most interesting way to tell the story. Or if you look at like another hugely popular show, Rick and Morty, where that one actually originated, like the series originated as a parody of like Doc Brown and Marty McFly from Back to the Future, the Back to the Future movies. But anyway, in that pilot, that's more of like, it's like we know Rick had come back, he had been away for years, whatever, and then like it's already establishing the relationship between Rick and Morty. Any show that has like this person and this person, like, that odd couple dynamic, that's always like a strong thing to establish right away as well. Like, oh, who's the, like the balance between the two characters, which one's the serious one, which one's the like dumb one, whatever. I've already talked about like odd couple dynamics, the two polar opposites basically, and how they play off of each other. Another great one being like the Angry Beavers, Norbert and Daggett. So anyway, though, with Rick and Morty, how it ends like with like, 100 years Rick and Morty, we're going to be doing these adventures, like, going on their adventures. So establishing all of that and seeing how he has the portal gun, he can go to any dimension. So like establishing this is the rules of the show. This is what this show is going to be. So taking your characters, figuring out where, like what time they're living in, is this present day, is this some futuristic, different kind of society, like is it more of a sci-fi, is it more of a fantasy, is it more of a like real time, is it like in the past, things like that, is it its own reality? And then it's a matter of planning out the plot of the pilot and what kind of stories we're going to explore, like a taste of the character dynamics, a taste of if there are villains in the show, a taste of, well, this is the world, these are the kind of stories, so things like that. So another one I'm thinking of now is Danny Phantom, another show I loved so much growing up. That one's not a premise pilot either, because the premise would be like, it's explained in the theme song how he gets his ghost powers. So in that one, it's like, well, he's a teenager, he's in high school, so he's dealing with that, and he's dealing with these secret ghost powers that only his two best friends know about, and he has to fight ghosts, and he has to figure out how to control his powers. So those are the kinds of things that are going to be explored throughout the show. Or another phenomenal one, which I'm recently been watching for the first time all the way through, actually, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Obviously phenomenal series, one of the best of all time. Gorgeous animation, phenomenal voice acting, emotional, beautiful. impactful storytelling. You already know, I'm sure. But with that one, how it establishes, so that one being a premise pilot, how Sokka and Katara discover Aang in the ice, and he, of course, is the Avatar. And that one, though, is a little bit, like, goofier with the humor. Obviously, like, it gets much more serious and deeper, the storyline, as the series progresses. But establishing that he's the Avatar, he has to master all 4 elements: air, water, fire, and earth. And then, of course, Prince Zuko, how he's trying to find the Avatar so he can restore his honor. So, so that's, like, with that too. And how we, like, incredible world building in that show, obviously, with each of the, like, the Water Tribe, the Air Nomads, the Fire Nation, and the Earth Kingdom. So that one's incredible too. And what makes makes them stand out is that, like, whether it's having a sweet emotional, like, depending on the tone of the show, if that's having, like, a sweet emotional moment between 2 characters, say for instance Ross and Rachel, like a little moment at the end where then, like, he's like, oh, maybe I can ask you out, and she's like, yeah, maybe. And, like, a cute little thing. It's like, okay, like, these 2 are going to be, like, the relationship to watch. Or in New Girl, when then Nick is, like, when they start singing to Jess, I've had the time of my life, because that's when she's going through a breakup. She keeps watching Dirty Dancing. And then shows, like, these guys are here for her. They like her. They want, they're going to be here for her. They're cheering her up, and it's really sweet. And Nick is the one who led it all, so he really cares about her. So establishing things like that. Or establishing, like, the main goal of the series, like with Avatar: The Last Airbender, as I just mentioned. So basically, like, having a moment that just makes it stand out, whether that's something that's purposely over the top comedically, or just something that just, like, impacts you and, like, just gets to you, like, in a profound way, like with BoJack Horseman, of course. So anything like that. And then it's just, like, after having your characters, establishing what the story is going to be, like, just writing an outline. And I've learned that with an outline, that what you should try to avoid, actually, is avoid putting any dialogue in it at all when you do an outline. And that's, like, establishing again, like, well, is this, like, with sitcoms in particular, they're a half hour, so the 3-act structure with them, how many scenes you're going to have. And then usually, like, the 3rd act is the shortest of them. So then also another show that I absolutely love is Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And that show, the first episode, like the pilot, is called The Gang Gets Racist. So that alone, that title alone tells you, okay, these are not great people. They are really deranged, to say the least. They're horrible people. And it plays into the, like, not the typical sitcom of, like, these are nice people that you, like, look up to or want to be friends with. These are, like, these degenerate people, and how crazy it is. Like, okay, so they have a bar. We know that Dennis and Dee are siblings. We know that they are all friends, and that, like, Charlie is in love with the waitress. So, like, all that kind of stuff, how it establishes all of that. And then, like, the tone of the show and how it's, like, poking fun of these, like, really terrible people, and how they basically always lose at the end. They almost never ever get a win because they are terrible people, and then we're laughing at that and that they're just crazy. So something like that as well, where again, it's establishing the tone, establishing the characters, establishing the kinds of stories you can expect from the pilot. So then writing the pilot, like writing, like, anything, it's always good, like, once you have your first script, then knowing that you have to get notes on it, you have to get feedback. So, like, whether it's trusted friends, or if you're in, like, a writer's group or in a class, seeing what can be made better in the script, whether that is improving dialogue, making things clearer, because it's always important to be concise. It's always important to be, like, less explainy, like, as they say, show, don't tell. So instead of explaining things, is there a way to show something, whether that's in a flashback, whether that's interesting character quirks, things like that. So finding then these ways to elevate the story even more and make other things stand out more, make the script more memorable, like make the pilot more memorable. And then, like, eventually goes through multiple revisions. But then hopefully by the end of it, then you have something that's absolutely amazing, that you're excited to sell. Like, you have the passion for it, and you know that people are going to want to see it, and people are going to want to watch every week. And then if your pilot is sold, they saw the potential in it, they saw, okay, this series has legs. So then, like, with the second episode, and like what I've said before, that one of my teachers has said, which is something called rewrite the pilot 6 times. So like taking the same formula for the pilot and then rewriting it in a way where the similar things happen, but it's like different conflicts, but like the same outcome in a way. If it's like, okay, they're all friends, they all come together to help each other in the end. Like if you did that in the pilot, then like again in the following few episodes. I'm actually currently working on a pilot, and right now like I already see that there are things that I'm trying to figure out about the characters. A hard thing I would say is their backstory. It's like, okay, well, if we do this, then this is going to be something that's part of their character. So then it has to like always come up then or be a part of their character. Like if they're from a certain state, if they are an only child or something, if they have phobias, like things that you can explore about the characters that can obviously come later on in the series, but things to think about that just flesh them out more, make them feel like real people. And more importantly, with all of that, establishing their motivations, what it is they want, what it is they're striving for. Because the thing about series is that once the character gets what they want, then that's more or less the end of the series. Like if it's a long-term goal, like for instance with Penny from The Big Bang Theory, she always wanted to be an actress, but she only ever had small successes. If she ever became like an actual Hollywood actress, like a movie star or TV star or something in the show, then that would like change the DNA of the show. And sometimes like if you're going for a different season arc every season, then that can work. Like also I'm thinking of now Parks and Recreation, which is another phenomenal show, which again I mentioned co-created by Mike Schur and Greg Daniels, who develops the American version of The Office. But in Parks and Rec, in that show, we learn about our main character, Leslie Knope, played by Amy Poehler, and how she really loves her job, wanting to do anything to help in any way she can. And then, of course, her boss, Ron Swanson, who just hates the government, just kind of begrudgingly there, and like each of the characters. But then like with each season rather, when like new characters come along, like later on when Ben and Chris come along, and then we see Leslie going through the ranks, like moving up and like doing other, even though they're still like in government obviously, like then like she runs for city council, then it's like okay, now she's on city council, and now but then she's still doing this. So that's like then that whole season 4 was like her whole campaign for that, and how though like the job changes, like the character still stays the same. So like when they go through triumphs and things like that, career changes, like as long as it's not changing the DNA of the show. Like say for instance on New Girl, if one of them moves out, which actually that did happen, Schmidt had moved out, but then he like ends up coming back. But then in the final season, then like the premise has changed where they're all living in different places except for Nick and Jess, who are still in the loft. So that changes a little bit, but still it's a matter of maintaining the core relationships of the show and things like that. So that's why like with family sitcoms it gets more difficult when the kids get older, like on Modern Family as well, with each of the families, and like when the kids getting older and then they were away at college or something, or when like then they had come back. So it's just a matter of what is important to you, what speaks to you, what kind of characters would you want to be with every week to write stories about, and the kind of world you want to explore, if you're creating a whole new world, or if you are taking from, like making it more personal experiences, things like that. So it's just a matter of keep writing, don't give up, and it takes a lot of time, but it'll all be worth it in the end to like have that really strong pilot. So just never give up. Always like a good reminder, never give up. And that's going to be a wrap on the 100th episode of Storytelling Saga. I can't believe it's already been 100 episodes. Time really does fly. It's just insane. I mean, it feels like just yesterday I was starting this podcast, and now here we are almost 2 years later. So I would just like to say, whether you've been listening to this podcast since the very beginning, or if you're a more recent listener and you're catching up on all the episodes, or if you're a more casual listener, you just check out the episodes with the topics that are most interesting to you, whatever the case may be, I truly thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. It means so much to me, so truly thank you so much. And as always, you can check out the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Check out storytellingsaga.com. You can send me a question, comment, or writing prompt in the contact section there, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I thought I'd try something a little different. I'm going to be doing my first ever character study on the podcast. And for my first one, I thought I'd discuss Beatrice Horseman. That's BoJack Horseman's mom. So that's going to be very interesting. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.